If you had to kind of teach, hey, here's how you learn from data 101, what would that be?
I think the first thing is understanding, what it is that they're trying to solve for. But if we look at most retailers, their data is in disparate places that doesn't talk to each other. And inventory doesn't always inventory needs and how they manage data and how they even consume data doesn't always translate to how they can take that same data asset and have it talk to sales data or how marketing. And sometimes there's no connective tissue for them to be able to put a story together.
Welcome back to another episode of the Retail Perch. And looks like, Gary, we're getting into a rhythm here. Every couple of weeks, we got an episode coming out and
I
getting a little
know.
professional here.
Okay, Courtney is the real taskmaster here.
I know. Look at this. We've got a new logo, a new bird, and it's all these cool things coming around. Yeah. I guess finally growing up. Yeah. So no, I think I know, and I was listening to the last couple of episodes, and I think I'm excited about the topics we're covering, Gary. I think it's, we're
Yes.
starting to get, I think, some really fantastic guests, and hopefully people who are listening are getting some value out of this instead of
Well,
just
and I think the discussion we're going to have today is going to be of real interest to a lot of people.
Yeah, in fact, I think in our recent event we were at, we were with a bunch of retailers. I think they're all interested in data, and that's really going to be the topic of the conversation today. And I think it's interesting on multiple points. One is, I think we live in an age of data being everywhere. Data is enabling technologies that we have today,
Yeah.
but data is also the cause of concern for a lot of people in terms of breaches, security, cybersecurity. So anyway, so we have an expert who spent their entire life in data, and we have Virginia Marsh here, who's our guest on the Retail Perch. Hi, Virginia. Welcome to the Retail Perch.
Thank you.
Yeah, so great to have you on board. Instead of me reading out a long intro, I'm sure you can do a much better job of telling us your background and your career and, your story up to now. So go for it.
So I'm Virginia Marsh, and I think my story, my whole love of data started. My dad owned a trucking company. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and he believed that for us to really be able to be successful in life, we needed to learn the business inside and out. So we got to do everything from accounts payable to loading trucks. And the most common theme for success for us to be able to speak the language to every vertical, to be able to do every task is data. And so I'm going to age myself here, but my brother and I learned how to code on a Commodore 64. So I'm just going to leave it right there. I mean, it was something that was probably brought up. No, I'm just kidding. That was really just our start, is we really were self-taught. We were scrappy. We needed to learn everything. And it was really eye-opening as I started to go into other parts of my career. I worked for Gillette, and I started off in the manufacturing plant working on really the robotics and the machinery. And Gillette was the one that actually afforded me my master's, my bachelor's, and my master's. And I was able to work through with them everything from working in the manufacturing plant to being client facing. And again, even with that foundation, what I learned very quickly is the only way to really be able to translate the need or the outcome was really being able to understand and read the tea leaves. And that's all within the data. And so from there, I was able to get work not only on the Gillette and be able to work with different retailers and be able to blend data into the outcomes, but I was able to work even in a student loan industry, which was really helping them understand and track eyeballs as to where in the application people were dropping off so that I can help them optimize that process and be able to get their product from start to finish and not have too many people drop out of the process, to being able to work with major brands like Anheuser-Busch. And with Anheuser-Busch, what was really interesting is I was able to work all the way from category management to being able to build schematics. And again, to be able to defend and build schematics, some of them sometimes were in a back room very late at night, but it all had to do, the only thing that you can defend of being able to put that placement had to be data. To being able to work with companies like L'Oreal, which was really interesting because now you're working with consumables to actually going and working with how people are applying in personal care to being able to then translate that as I was working with Anheuser-Busch and L'Oreal, which was really cool as I worked on site at CVS. And in some cases, I think CVS forgot that I worked for other companies and I was able to work with them a lot with their data. And it translated to a career of me working with category management and just regular data to being able to work into the loyalty platform. And that's where I was able to open my eyes even more to it's not so much as to what we're seeing in the data and translating the value out of that, but then being able to understand how people are applying loyalty on top of that and understanding the loyalty aspect to how people behave. And then from there, it was really cool because then now I had CPG retailer and I was able to work over at Symphony AI, which helped me tie together now a little bit more on the software side. So understanding the brand perspective, understanding retailer perspective, and then coming into the understanding like platforms and software really just started helping me understand all the different pieces of data that tie together to, now where I'm working to MarTech and AdTech. So I feel like I've come a long way from,
Wow.
loading trucks in Puerto Rico to now being able to work with data in a space that kind of ties everything together, knowing how the brands operate, knowing how retailers operate, and then really understanding the consumer lens, and then being able to tie and stitch that all together is where you can really put that value proposition together to both sides of what's the value to me as to what I'm doing with data and how that's going to translate to value to those who are consuming the data that I'm working with. And that
That's
leads me to working with
amazing.
Fluent.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing because I think you're probably in a terrific position then to understand the importance of discipline around data, maintaining it. And we talk on this episode a lot about how, I guess, not really a fault of their own, but because of legacy systems and how retailers typically operated, data sits in silos and they don't, and creating a unified understanding of a business becomes really challenging because, you have this fragmented stuff, in some cases redundant stuff sitting all over the place, right? And it's dirty work, but it has to be done if you want to get a good outcome, right?
I agree. And I think, the reason behind the silos too is because what matters to me in finance does not quite translate to the same value proposition as to the brand, as to even HR, as to sales.
Yep.
Not everybody has that common thread. So everybody's use case is different. But if we were to stop and really find the common thread across every department and how that translates to the end consumer, that's when the data starts becoming relevant. It might not be relevant to finance while you're doing that, but at the end of the day, what you'll be able to stitch together with the data that across all different verticals, that's when you're able to offer that strong value proposition and be able to tell the story with the data. And it will translate to the value to finance. It's just later down the line versus what sales and brands and marketing are trying to do.
So the question in my head is, somebody has data and data comes in many forms. So let's, most people think about data, they think of maybe a spreadsheet, right? Some information that's there, right? Now, when you've looked at data, what's your approach to deriving insights from data? I mean, what is the kind of like the mindset you're going in with when you're starting to look at a data set and say, okay, how do I explore this? Because I think people understand what I want to say KPIs, right? They understand key indicators, but there's obviously a deeper, that's like surface, right? Now you go skin deep, and I think about it really, you go to a doctor, get blood work done, you get your basic report, but that only gives you a starting point to your investigation, right? As to where to go. So how do you think about being a data expert? How do you think about kind of diving into data and defining insights?
So I think that if at first when I started doing data, it was really about how do I solve for the problem now? But after going through the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt training, I was able to really help frame the hypothesis first, and then I prove my hypothesis. So if I'm within a 95 confidence level that this is what I'm trying to solve for, then I'm going to try to solve, prove or disprove it, and then move on. And so it does sound a little more geeky, but it helps me in my framework to be able to say, this is what I think is the issue, and then I try to solve it. Now, that being said, I like to take the middle of the line. So when I consider like a value engineer is somebody who can take the perspective of, so if I look at Fluent, I have to understand what's the value prop for Fluent. But then being in that middle line, I also have to understand for the people who are consuming our product, what's the value for them? And then being able to solve for both sides, because ultimately I have to be able to solve for what's going to work for Fluent, because it's a business. But then I need to be able to find what's that common ground and how do I find that value proposition for the client and tie that in. And normally when I do that, the hypothesis is going to prove or disprove, is there an ROI or is it mutually beneficial, or does somebody have to give a little bit to be able to come to a positive outcome?
Yeah, I think there's also, at least in my experience, a bit of sort of left brain, right brain thinking here also, right? To really get at powerful insights. You certainly have to be analytical, comfortable with the numbers, comfortable digging into all that data, but at the same time, creative in how you're thinking about it, creative in how you're thinking about what the problem is you're looking to solve, or what are you looking to discover, right? How do people shop, and being able to really understand that and then translate to, okay, what do I look for in the data to understand that?
I completely agree. And at the end of the day, sometimes, whether it's a retailer or a brand or a data broker, they don't always understand the actual use case that they're looking for. They think that this is what they want. But then as you start peeling back the onion, they're like, oh, no, no, I think now I know. So if you can think back and then be prepared a few steps ahead of saying, okay, this is what you asked for. But if I were to peel this back a little bit more, if we were to do this, this, and this, now the value proposition is exponentially greater, because now we're not only solving for this immediate need, but we're laying the groundwork for future possibilities and being able to solve for a future strategic plan, not just a short-term win.
Got it. So if I'm putting my retailer hat on and I'm thinking about, all these sources of data that I have access to, right? Whether it is, I have transactional data, I have, my supply chain, logistic, inventory, marketing, campaign information. What would your advice be to somebody who's a retailer to kind of get the process of getting organized about how they can maximize? I think there's two things. One is there something in the data that's telling me I need to change my business tactic or strategy, right? And number two, is there something in the data that gives me pointers of how I can improve or better serve my customers? How should they, what's your basic approach to attacking that problem? Because, I think one of the challenges that I see that retailers have, and I think a lot of people who have access to data, is the issue is not access to data. The issue is, there's plenty of data to go around. The issue is really how do you distill, right, the key facts that you want out of that data, and how do you learn to kind of drill down to get to your answer and your insights. So if you had to kind of teach, hey, here's how you learn from data 101, what would that be?
I think the first thing is understanding, what it is that they're trying to solve for. But if we back it up and we look at, we won't even mention a retailer, but if we look at most retailers, their data is in disparate places. It doesn't talk to each other. And inventory doesn't always inventory needs and how they manage data and how they even consume data doesn't always translate to how they can take that same data asset and have it talk to sales data, or how marketing, and sometimes there's no connective tissue for them to be able to put a story together. So you could say that I sold out of XYZ, but is it because of a certain price point that, we didn't expect to have that kind of velocity? Or was it because it wasn't planned correctly, and because the inventory system isn't actually really speaking to or understanding what marketing is doing, what sales is doing across the board? And so unless they have a way to centralize and be able to have all data pieces be able to speak to each other and tie together into one story, I think you're still going to be trying to figure out that black box. You're not going to be able to see or translate that into a need. And then
So-
ultimately, especially for retailers, they need to understand that the consumer is ever changing, and the consumer behavior in 2024 is completely drastically different than how they're behaving today. Whatever the factors are that are driving that behavior, it's totally different. How they're showing up, how they're shopping, what they're buying is different. And I think most of it is because of how much they're having to pay for what what they're getting. But I also do think that a lot of it, and from the questions that I've been able to ask our audiences, is mostly around, it's just a little bit of fear-based. They're just behaving differently. So is inventory taking that into consideration, that even though people are still shopping, they might not be buying as much or within the same frequency. They might not be front loading. They might not be doing that same behavior because, one, they just don't have the financial, and I want to put this very carefully, they might not have that financial, I don't know, it's like if they don't feel comfortable that what they have today is going to be there tomorrow. Just like, most people are not investing as much. And this is just based off what we've asked people. They're hoarding their money, they're saving it in their immediate accounts because they're not sure of what's going on in the economy. So then how is that translating to how somebody who is planning inventory out for the year, to how people are actually showing up in retailer today versus trying to say, this is what happened last year, so I'm going to forecast based on behavior last year. That's what I'm going to say this year, and then let's just add 10% because we're going to go at it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, I think there's at least a couple sides to the whole data issue. And Virginia, completely agree with what you're saying. You look at retail today and a lot of silos, a lot of disparate systems, a lot of disparate databases. All that data's got to be brought together. But, what I see and hear as I talk to different retail executives is, even if that data is brought together that can enable new insights, the executives, the people that have been doing these roles for years, their thinking has become siloed. And, they look at the world just through that lens that they have. So the other side of this, I think, is helping people, in those different roles begin to sort of break down their thinking and open the doors to, there's a whole new way to look at the world now. Because for the first time, I can connect this piece of data to that piece of data to this piece of data that I was never able to do before.
I agree. And I think, and I guess then the question too becomes, is how much of that is fear of being afraid of saying the wrong thing, or being misinterpreting, or not understanding how exactly to leverage the data? And then I guess my next question would be, is how comfortable would they be to, one, leveraging not only AI, but leveraging consultative, like from their partners, consultative, helping them understand, instead of just coming in trying to sell you something, but requesting that consultative selling, requesting that two-way dialogue, and saying, I know what I know, but I also don't know what I don't know. And even though I have all this data, I might not understand what that means to me. But then how does that translate to how the customer is behaving outside of my four walls? And then how do I translate that into the ROI? And then I want to be able to speak to this data, but if I'm afraid of, or I don't really understand it, am I going to not look smart in front of my superiors because I'm not understanding how to translate the tea leaves or how to ask for help?
Yeah, and I think another angle there is not only, maybe fear as you're describing it, but I've been incentivized to deliver these numbers in my area, my silo. And if all of a sudden that world starts changing, how do different executives think about that? Right? So there's I think a lot of challenges here.
I agree. And I think too is if, it also goes back to how much are executive actually getting trained on how to leverage the insights? Like how much are they being outside training and being able to understand like, here's all the different data assets that I have available to me, but how do I translate that into what it is that I need to deliver? Because we all have a number we have to deliver to, and we all have a very limited amount of time. And at some point, they have to say, what has to give for me to be able to drive this forward? Do I risk trusting the data or do I go with my gut? And at what point does it become the data is where I should go and the data should be my gut check?
Hmm. I know you brought up a term here. Obviously, in the last, what's happened in technology in the last 2 to 3 years has dramatically increased our ability to understand data at large volumes, right? Because of AI, and it's no longer a manual effort to do it. How do you see that kind of transforming our approach to data? Because now, you have TLDR, right? And everybody's got a TLDR before their article, and the ability to, whether it's you're trying to summarize a meeting or use Notebook LM to summarize an entire document, or there's just so much more capacity to consume, distill, and understand topics. And you would think that that's going to have a profound impact on how we are going to process and leverage data, right?
You completely right. I'm a huge fan of AI, but I do recognize just from who I've spoken to, and some folks are not quite comfortable. And so, being able to get them to that comfort level where they can, leverage AI in whatever format, whether it means that they're, translating a meeting or using ChatGPT to run by, any kind of results, they still have to get that comfort level and get past the fear of, this is going to take my job or this is, going to take over, and to this is a tool that's going to help me do something that would have taken me a week to finish, a couple hours to finish. It's a tool that's going to help me take out all of the manual stuff that I would have had to have done. And it's giving me the opportunity to now see what are the total results? What is it that I'm seeing? And now I can use my perspective, my gut, my training, my knowledge to say, this is why this is happening, because everything that led up to what I'm going to translate as to my reason behind my decision, all the data is right there. Not that they have to disparate pieces. It's all tied into them together. And so if you really use AI in the right way, it saves you hours and hours of what, would have been manual, pecking, looking, trying to hunt for stuff. It's all at your fingertips. And now you have the ability to translate that into what the value is, what it is you're trying to solve for. Because now you're not spending all your time researching. Now you're spending your time taking this data and turning it into, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is the reason why. And it's all there for you. Now, that being said, you also have to be careful because AI is not going to give you always the right information. So you have to be careful. If you're using a ChatGPT and you ask it a question, make sure you validate, check it, because even chat will give you some links and you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. So
Yeah.
you have to also not trust that AI is 100% there and 100% going to be able to help you. You have to validate, you have to check. But in that time that you're spending checking and validating, it's only helping you set your baseline and better understanding of the data that you're using and what you're trying to solve for.
Right. So what about, let's talk about this other piece, other side of data, the darker side of data, right? Which is every month or every couple of months you hear this data breach, right? That happens, and people I think are concerned. I mean, we live in a world where it's hopeless to think that somehow your data is your data forever, right? I mean, there's just, as much as we want to think that it's possible, I think it's near impossible because of the number of cookie trails we leave behind with every aspect of what we do in our lives.
Agree.
So how do you, but as a data practitioner, you have to have be mindful and respectful of the data that you have, right?
Right.
So how do you think about that from a privacy regulations perspective? How do you get your customers to trust you in the fact that you're using their data responsibly?
Well, I mean, first thing first is people opt in and make sure that that opt-in is respected and people know from the start. So, just for where I am right now, our owned and operated, people know from the start what they're doing, what they're getting, and what's going to happen to their data. And then you have to respect if somebody opts out, you need to take them off the list and take care of that. And the other thing too that you need to keep in mind is that because you have all this data, you have a responsibility to make sure that that data is not visible to everybody. That PII has to be masked. So whenever I'm in our central database, I can't see that it's Shekar. I can see a number and I can create a cohort based off of your behavior, but we don't see your PII. We keep that very protected for a reason because that's our, ultimately we want our customers to trust us. And the only way that we can do that is making sure that we're 100% compliant. And then whenever we work with data that's outside of what we're doing, if we're working with you or we were sharing data, everything goes through a clean room. We have to make sure, and that way we assure that your data is safe on your side, our data is safe on our side, and what we're working on together, it doesn't impede us to be able to complete the project, but it makes sure that the customer data is always safe. Because you don't need to know the person's PII to be able to do the analytics and deliver on your project. You just need to know that persona, not that it's Shekar.
Right.
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 Yeah.
No, I think this is very exciting, and I think there is obviously you've also worked on the other side where you have helped companies leverage the data that they have to, and I think, this kind of ties in together. One is the volume of data, how you put it all together to drive insights, how do you protect it? And then maybe the third stage, which is, okay, now that you've got data and it's protected, how do you then, potentially derive value out of it, right? How can you take those insights and, monetize it in some responsible fashion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and Shekar, just building on that, so I'm glad you went in that direction because I think a lot of retailers, they see, read, hear almost every day, right, about data monetization. And, I think there's a lot of retailers that have got dollar signs in their eyes when they think about it. But, there's certainly differences in what's realistic for different retailers. Certainly a top five retailer can monetize their data in many different directions than a 10-store retailer, for example. So, Virginia, I'd be curious, any thoughts around how you sort of frame that or how you might frame that for some of our listeners? Where is that? And obviously there's no black and white line, but where's that sort of dividing line thinking about different sizes of retailers and how they can monetize or what they can realize from their data?
And I think if you look at the smaller retailers, and again, if you only have, 5, 10 stores, the data is still extremely valuable, especially internally as you're building out your value proposition for your consumers that are coming into your stores. That data is extremely valuable, not only to you, but to all the brands that are also going to be working with you to better understand how that translates to the consumer. Now, it might not be as valuable for you to be able to package that data up and sell it for millions of dollars because, again, you only have a small subset of, in some cases, a very niche market. But what it does help you do is if you do have, 5, 6 stores and you do have a slightly different clientele, what I would do is just understanding how that data differentiates from the larger retailers there's still value in it. As if you were to try to sell that to a data broker, or if you were to go to hedge funds, if you have a niche market, they don't want to know who your customer is. They just want to understand the cohort behind those consumers so that they can better understand the street value. So there is value there. Now, there's also, like I said, to the brands and everything else, they don't need to see your PII, but what they need to understand is how to translate that data or that historical data into being able to do their forecasting, be able to go upstairs and say, hey, we need to be able to offer this price point because this is the thresholds that we're working with. So the value is there. It's just keeping that mindset that it's probably not worth millions and millions of dollars on the street, but there's still value. It just depends on the type of question that your data solves for. Now, the larger ones will, again, the data is very valuable if it's something that translates to a large population. But then you have to keep in mind that most people shop 2 or 3 retailers. So you're only looking at it from your lens. You're still not seeing that share of wallet of where else your customer's shopping. So you need to keep that in perspective as you're trying to sell this data outside of your 4 walls. If you're buying their data, you still need to buy the supplemental data that's going to help solve for who that customer or where that wallet is going. You're only seeing one portion of the wallet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the first rule is, again, I think the data is most valuable to you. I think once you figure out how to get insights to drive your own business, that automatically generates value potentially for external parties who may want to, get those insights. But if you're just in the business of trying to monetize data without you actually using it internally to drive your business, then I think you kind of lost the point, right?
Because then you're just asking for a revenue versus a partnership. If you're going to sell the data, but you're not actually going to leverage the data points or the insights that are coming from the people that are buying your data, then people are going to lose the value proposition of actually buying your data if you're not going to actually make changes based off of these data insights that are coming to you.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like the discussion we had last time, Gary, with Steve, talking about retail media and how, retailers want to jump into retail media, but they don't know exactly how it's going to impact their business. They're more excited about making money from the brands. They're going to put money into retail media. Right? So, looking at the future, right? Like the world is changing at an amazing pace. So if you're in retail, CPG, ad tech, what are the skills that you think somebody should be having now, as opposed to, it felt like the world was static for the last 20 years or 30 years, right? Nothing changed really in terms of how you approach data. But it seems like something has dramatically changed here. And what you need now to move forward in these industries is different from what you needed before. What would you say some of those, the leaders in these industries need to have now?
I think, we have to start off in saying, if we're looking at agentic AI and how AI is going to translate into the future and how consumers are potentially going to be shopping and the difference between them actually going to a retailer and touching and feeling versus, searching many pages to being able to go to an AI agent, say, this is what I'm looking for, and the agent to go not only find it, but then also give you the link to go from the actual find to the purchase. I think what retailers and brands really need to think about is how are they going to show up in that search? Are they truly classifying their products so that if it is something that is glucose, however you want to describe it, are you taking into consideration, if somebody's diabetic, are you taking into consideration all the underlying conditions that your product may solve for by a question that somebody's asking a system to go out or a bot to go out and purchase and find this for you for the best value and be able to find it within those parameters? And that all comes down to understanding your products, understanding not only your products, but if you're a retailer, understanding your value proposition to those people coming through the front door as to what you stand for, who you are, as well as what you're carrying on your shelves. And if somebody is going to go out and say, I want somebody who's environmentally, positive, that's somebody that's going to be offering the best prices, then, you need to make sure that everything around your brand, whether it's a brand or a product or a retailer, is clearly defined in a way that the agentic AI will be able to find it and be able to offer that up to the consumer as here's what we found and here's what we recommend based off of what you're saying. This is your best fit. And it all
I think even the
understanding
world of
yeah.
online advertising, I think, is going to change, right? Because if an agent is going to go browse your site, it's not going to see an ad. It's just going to go get the information. Then what happens to display ads? What happens to these things that people are invested in? What do you mean by user interface anymore, right? How does that change? How does that morph? If agents are going to do the most of the browsing on your behalf, I think people need to kind of start thinking about, hey, what does that mean for my business? It's like, I guess the 1990s, you only had brick and mortar stores and everybody was going online. And if you weren't thinking about how people would shop your store, other than walking through your doors, you kind of got left behind, right? So
Great. Yeah. I mean, I don't think the social impact is going to go away. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time for people to truly adapt, an agent doing their shopping for them. But we need to continue down that path and be ready for it because people are unpredictable. And like I said, the consumer behavior and how people are approaching what they buy, what they consume is completely different and it's going to continue to evolve. And by the time we get to the end of 2025, it's going to be even a different perspective. So I
do you
think,
feel that the consumer is, going to be more in control of what they want to buy, and it's going to be more and more difficult to maybe influence purchase behavior because you now have this very, I want to say, a very stealth method of doing commerce, right? Almost, right? Maybe before you saw something on TikTok or Instagram and you clicked and went and bought the item. But now, you're living your life and something else is fulfilling your needs.
agreed. Well, and if you look at how private label rose up after everything that happened with the pandemic and how private label was, always up there and relevant, but then right after the pandemic, how that changed and private label became so much more prevalent. And then look at it today. It's like the whole national brand and how people are approaching branding is completely different. They are not only looking at the best price, but they're looking at everything else that comes with that brand. And if private label is sufficing, which it is because people are going back, it tells you a lot about how people are changing. And ultimately, where that's going to lead at the end, it really just has to be how the brands are defining themselves. And it can't just be about price. There's got to be a lot more systems behind it.
And the answers are in the data.
Right. Consumers are telling you, they're telling you what they want.
Exactly.
And, I know we're inferring a lot of behavior on what you look at online. We're inferring if you look on it at that line, then you must be this. And in some cases, the spray and pray does work. But at some point, especially if you know and you can talk to your consumer, you should ask them because they're more than willing to tell you what they want. They're going to show you with how they behave and what they buy, but they're more than willing to tell you. That's, for Fluent, we have over 100 million people who have opted in, and we have thousands of people daily going and answering survey questions. And it's really interesting because they're willing to tell you exactly what it is that they want and what they think. It's what are we going to do with that information to
so this is a good segue into, so tell us a little bit about Fluent. What does Fluent do?
So what I do so we have, like I said, we have our own owned and operated. And so what we do is we can ask pretty much any question. And so we have people go in, they go through our platform and they answer survey questions. So we have a lot of healthcare clients as well, who, as you can imagine, not so easy to get that kind of information. But we can ask pretty much any question, and our clients can decide not to answer the question, but they can flow through or they can answer the question. And then we take those responses and we turn them into segments. And then we publish those segments on all the major platforms. And so we can ask anything. I just asked a few weeks ago questions around, just wanted to understand where people were in their minds around agentic AI. Or I wanted to understand, given everything that's going on in the market, what is it that people are perceiving as, do I continue to invest or do I hold back, or how am I investing, or am I listening to the signals that are going on in the market and then investing in some stocks or whatever that are completely different, or am I hoarding? And in most, about 6% of them said that they were, continuing of what they were doing, but the bulk of them pretty much are holding back and they're waiting to see what's going to happen. It's kind of like that popcorn sitting there going, all right, I want to see what happens, but I'm gonna keep it all over here.
Right. They're watching the
Yeah.
movie, huh?
Exactly. But
Yeah.
ultimately, we take this data, which is, people are declaring whatever it is that we're asking. We're taking this data, and then we can either just use that seed and create an audience, or if a client wants, we can model it for reach and scale. And then we put it on all the major platforms. But then because we have over 100 million people, we can actually do anything you want. So if you wanted to know, men between the ages of 44 and 55 who have a certain income, who have an affinity towards playing video games, like we can create those kind of segments as well on the fly. So it just depends on, because we have so many years of people have responded to survey questions, we have tons and tons of data about that 100 million plus people.
Well,
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. And Virginia, if somebody needed to reach out to you, how would they do that?
They can reach out or my LinkedIn, or I'm at vmarsh@fluentco.com, or my LinkedIn, and I'm happy to, talk anything data, whether it just be
Cool.
understanding what you're working on and how that translate, or if you just really want to talk about it, like you and I, that's how we met, of just understanding different data. I'm happy to roll up my sleeves and talk at any time.
Well, for those of you who are listening, Virginia and I have had many conversations prior to this one, and that's why she's on the show, because I knew this would be a super interesting topic. But I'm sure we can do many, many more episodes with you, Virginia. But
Yeah.
Gary, we're about at time, and probably draw this to a close. Virginia, thank you so much for being on the show. Hopefully you'll come back and we can talk more. And I'm sure, the rate at which stuff is changing, there's going to be new stuff to talk about next time we come around here.
That's right.
So,
There's always new data.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there's always new data. That's right. There's always new data, right? Anyway, anything you want to? I was going to say any last words. I don't think that comes across right.
Huh.
But is there anything else you want to add, Virginia, before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank you guys for having me. This was really great. I'm glad we completely went off script and didn't really ask a lot of questions. I thought it was amazing. And you guys are just so smart and intuitive. So it was really great just to talk to you guys about data. And I'm sorry it's a short time, because I could probably talk your ears off. So
Well,
Yeah.
we'll have you back, but thank you
Yeah,
for
we'll
being with
definitely have
us
you
today.
back.
thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And I want to just give a shout out to Courtney and her team for changing our backgrounds, Gary. We're no longer stuck in the studio. We're out of the studio.
I know, that's right. We've broken free.
Or if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, we used to have a background which put us in like a virtual studio, and we no longer have that now. So anyway, thanks guys, and we will see you back in another episode in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.